Right, so if there is one thing literally nobody in their right mind should be doing right now, it is praising the so-called most moral army in the world. You'd have to be as mad as Benjamin Netanyahu to even consider such a stance regarding the Israeli Defence Force. But then, this is what happens when you have an unelected upper chamber stuffed with party loyalists who have a job for life and make an absolute joke of our so-called mother of all parliaments, so permanently detached from the real world as they are. I am, of course, referring to the House of Lords. It's not a democracy, it's an archaic leftover. The vast majority of the people going in and getting paid £332 a day are getting paid to have a kip or wade through whatever Tory obscenity is getting made into law, get a discounted dinner and just sit around farting dust all day. But for someone here and now to stand up and praise the army of a regime against whom a plausible case for genocide has been found is a massive problem. Though sadly, being a Conservative, they'd probably sooner shake his hand than censure him. Right, so, praising the IDF for how many Palestinians the IDF have killed, acceptable casualties in light of taking out Hamas operatives, given Israel are being, as we know, dragged through The Hague on the basis of a plausible case for genocide, really ought to be seen as incitement, frankly, shouldn't it? The IDF should be condemned by everyone in the strongest possible terms, and the Lord in question should be sat down and made to watch, perhaps, some of the hundreds of thousands of videos that are being posted to social media that are showing the aftermath of the IDF's actions, the destruction of public infrastructure, the snipers shooting innocent victims in the street, and so much more. Much of it far more harrowing than I care to describe. I don't think I actually need to, because this genocide is playing out before all of our eyes via social media in real time, that we know what is happening there. So I fail to see how this elevated gentleman can have got it so wrong, especially given he is also apparently a military historian, no less. Have a listen to this.
Even if we were to take Hamas's statistics as accurate, the 27,500 figure, and there's no reason why we should, because we don't do that with Putin, we don't do that with ISIS. If one subtracts the number of Gazans who've been killed by the quarter or so of Islamic Jihad and Hamas rockets that fall short, one's left with a fewer than 2-to-1 ratio of civilians to Hamas terrorists killed, of whom there have been over 9,000 so far. My lords, war is hell, and every individual civilian death is a tragedy. But speaking as a military historian, less than 2-to-1 is an astonishingly low ratio for modern urban warfare, where the terrorists routinely use civilians as human shields. And it's a testament to the professionalism, ethics, and values of the Israeli Defence Forces.
That was Lord Andrew Roberts, Baron Roberts of Belgravia. Got stuffed into the Lords by Boris Johnson in his 2022 honours list, and so taking a peerage from that bloviating buffoon should be a red card from the start. As a military historian, as he said, Roberts has written numerous books. Perhaps it was his biography of Winston Churchill that happened to win Bozo over. It certainly had the Tory Press gushing all over it. But not all of his historical works have been as well received as that one was. He, for example, wrote another biography of Napoleon Bonaparte, which the BBC turned into a 3-part mini-series, no less. And on that series, even the Torygraph tore it apart. The Daily Telegraph was quoted as saying it was unconvincing, saying that there was no getting away from Roberts's regular lapses into hero worship. And Roberts's remarks on the refreshing qualities of dictatorship made me wonder if he had taken leave of his senses. The Torygraph there. A fan of the dictatorial then, are you, Lord Roberts? Well, he's not above writing in the mad right-wing press himself either. He penned, for example, an article in the Daily Fail just last December entitled, "Why Hamas Are Worse Than the Nazis." We should just preclude him from any position of authority entirely on that alone, and obviously the Daily Mail as well, from being called a newspaper. Aside from that, he is a besotted royalist as well, because of course he is, having said, following the death of Prince Philip, that he was undoubtedly one of the reasons that the overwhelming majority of Britons today feel blessed that their country is a monarchy. Oh, speak for yourself, Andy. He's also a besotted Thatcherite, because of course he is. It's par for the course for the Tories, both red and blue today, and just as you'd expect for any true blue Tory, and indeed on par with his viewpoint of military history. Said of Tony Blair that he was a exemplary war leader with his vigorous prosecution of the war against terror, which would leave him regarded as a highly successful Prime Minister. Well, that's about as close to the truth as a Keir Starmer policy launch, really, isn't it? Please, no more. My ribs hurt. It's all too funny. Except it isn't. Roberts is also regarded as an Atlanticist, which means he believes in the relationship between the US and Europe to maintain order around the world, therefore. So it's little wonder he's coming down hard on the side of Israel with such gusting praise for one of the most amoral and depraved military forces on the planet, given their conduct. And now you know a little bit about Roberts and his military and political leanings, it may be not be so much of a surprise he thinks as he does in that piece of video there. He automatically questions taking Hamas's figures for civilian deaths at 28,500 and doesn't see why we should take any notice of those figures, because apparently bringing up Putin and ISIS, as others we ignore figures from, is somehow relevant here, because all terrorists are the same, presumably. For one, that terrorist label being applied to Hamas isn't an international one, it's our view of them, our government's view of them, the British government's viewpoint of Hamas. They are the elected government of the Gaza Strip, but that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you like them or not, that's a fact. And if you disregard and sneer at them, or not, dislike them because you're on the side of Israel, US-backed as they are, Atlanticist as you are, their figures have always been good enough for various other global publications, other international governments, and various bodies, not least of which the United Nations itself. The Gaza Ministry of Health figures have been historically found to be, by and large, accurate ones. Now, you could quibble military fatalities, especially in an ongoing war zone, because they're going to change all the time. Of course they will. They will never be bang on for very long. But Hamas are accurate in their reporting so far as they are aware. The same cannot be said of Israel, who lie about everything with impunity on the matter of fatalities, including who's committed them. It did, after all, take Israel 6 weeks to figure out they'd counted 200 too many Israeli fatalities in the aftermath of October 7th. Not only because their own counts are inaccurate, but because the bodies were so badly burned by their own forces, they didn't realise they'd accidentally counted 200 Hamas insurgents. Roberts offers no basis for his judgment here. It is his opinion. And when even the most loyal of Tory publications has in the past questioned his ability to avoid his own inbuilt bias in his writing, how can we judge his thinking any differently? He came up with this ratio of 2-to-1 in regards to Hamas agents killed compared to Palestinian civilian deaths, which is bonkers, given nearly 30,000 people are now dead. Roberts quotes a figure of 9,000 or more Hamas operatives that have been killed, but this is actually the high end of US estimates, and saying or more is pushing even that, because their estimates could be as low as 5,000. That would be a ratio of 1 Hamas operative for every 5 civilians at worst, or 1 Hamas operative to every 3.3 civilians at best. Certainly Roberts is taking that better end of that picture as read, and justifies his 2-to-1 figure based on subtracting civilians killed by rockets falling short that have been fired by Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, of which he quotes no actual numbers. Nobody has those figures. That's just a guess. It also implies that the US estimates are not taking such things as that into account either, so you're undermining the accuracy of their figures. Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad stopped firing rockets for the whole month of December into January, at the end of December, when South Africa filed its court case against Israel at the ICJ. They only resumed approximately a month later their rocket fire when Israel were blatantly not keeping in line with the ICJ ruling. That's a whole month where those deaths, any deaths in Gaza, cannot be attributed at all to Hamas or Islamic Palestinian Jihad, at all to what Lord Roberts had actually said. During that time, Israel carried on moving people down through the Gaza Strip and killing people with impunity, though. We know that. We've watched it. We've observed it. Do you know the figures Roberts admitted to include in any of his rambling, though? He didn't mention at all. Well, let's take the 127 journalists killed. Hamas have no interest in killing journalists. They want them to record what is happening. We all know who doesn't. 136 UNRWA workers have been killed. People who help Palestinian refugees working for an agency we know Israel hates and sees as a block to them taking over. How about the wanton destruction of infrastructure in Gaza then? Over 200,000 homes destroyed, 3 churches damaged. The same can be said for 522 mosques. There's 246 healthcare facilities destroyed, along with 317 healthcare professionals killed. Gaza is being rendered unlivable on purpose, and it is not in Hamas's interest to be the ones doing that. Still, 2-1, he says. War is hell. Those are good stats, all things considered. Well done to the IDF. Hamas are using civilians as human shields, so they're even better than my made-up figures consider them, but I'm a military historian, therefore you should just take me at my word. Hamas and the human shields story, only provided again by Israel, and again without proof. Hamas are hiding in the hospitals, they've told us. They're hiding in the schools. They're in amongst the civilian population, but that has been Israel's excuse to excuse its indiscrimination in its attacks. And instead of condemning Israel for that, instead of mentioning even once the fact it is Israel on trial for genocide and not Hamas, no case has been brought against Hamas. Yet you've got 55 countries in The Hague yesterday and again today presenting their case against Israel for their historic occupation of Palestinian territories. You're backing the wrong horse here, sunshine. All the evidence that he's clearly ignoring, that aforementioned inbuilt bias, or Roberts just isn't as big an expert as he'd like you to think he is in military history, you decide, means he's ignoring what is evidenced, and what is on trial even, in favour of things that are not. That he's in a position to make laws in this country despite not having been elected, and we're paying him to have these views and air them publicly, is frankly terrifying. He's praising the IDF for their professionalism, ethics and values. And all because they haven't killed as many Palestinians as he thinks they could have, based on figures I can only conclude he's made up. Well, they're on the verge of entering Rafah right now. What will your excuses be if they do, with everything the rest of us who aren't completely deluded fear will happen then? Do you know what else the most moral army in the world is doing, by the way, Lord Roberts? Going through abandoned houses and kitchens that haven't been blown up yet, and taking part in lifestyle puff pieces for the adoring Zionist masses, showing what they can cook up with the stolen food they're scrounging as they progress through Gaza. What would you think of that, then, I wonder? Waste not, want not, while the people who left starve to death in Rafah now as aid supplies can't get through? Is that what you'd think? Well, you can find out all about that particular story on this video recommendation here, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.